Welcome to Durban, welcome to Indaba 2017. My name is Andile Khumalo. I am joined in a room packed with international media, of course, and other local stakeholders in the tourism industry. Our conversation is going to be centered around the opportunity or risks, I guess, that could be presented by the current economic situation in South Africa. A lot of the foreign media have been asking questions around the hallways about uncertainty in the environment in South Africa and to what extent does that help or hurt the tourism industry. Of course, I'm not here alone. I do have an esteemed panel of experts that are going to be joining me in this discussion. So let me introduce them to you really quickly. Her name is Thabi Leoka. She's told me not to call her doctor anymore. She is an economist at Argon Asset Management. She's been, of course, globally with many other financial services firms, including Investec, Barclays, both here in South Africa and in London, as well as Standard Chartered and Corporate and Investment Banking. She is well-written, well-read, and has a good grasp of the dynamics of the South African economy. And of course, the focus this time around is going to be about the tourism industry. Thabi, let me welcome you to our panel. And right next to her is another lady who seems to be stalking me, or I'm stalking her, because last year, this time, we were in the very similar panel here at Indaba. 2016 it was last year. I'm talking about Matshatsi Ramawela. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Tourism Business Council of South Africa. Welcome, madam. And of course, representing business, I do have the CEO of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. They have got over 20,000 members in various chapters of various chambers around the country. Most of them are small, medium enterprises. They do have some big business, but by far the vast majority are SMMEs. And a big conversation around tourism in South Africa is the extent of inclusivity. To what extent are more and more smaller owned operators are able to get as much of the pie as possible, because we do know that there are some big players out there. Mr. Alan Mokoki, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Andile.
As I've mentioned earlier, the key theme here is about how do we create an enabling environment in which tourism can thrive, even in the face of a weaker currency as a result of the country's downgrade by the rating agencies. But of course, a part of the conversation we need to have, particularly after the World Economic Forum on Africa we've just had, also here in Durban, also here at the Nkosi Albert Luthuli ICC, is about how do we make sure that government and the private sector are partnering and not only delivering economic growth, but they're delivering inclusive economic growth. The world is a lot more aware and attentive to inequality. And every time we have these conversations about different sectors, we've got to think about how do we share whatever growth we can get out, especially in these times of slow growth, not just in South Africa, but also in other parts of the continent. I'm going to start with Thabi Leoka here, who, as an economist, I think is most qualified to set the scene for us on this theme. And Thabi, maybe, let's start with you painting the picture for us about what a ratings downgrade means for South Africa, means for its currency. Many people are saying the rand has not declined as many people thought it would. A couple of people are also saying that don't worry about the rand, it always bounces back. Does it then follow that if indeed you have a ratings downgrade, you will have a falling currency domestically, and therefore there will be a causal link between that and the growth of tourism? What has been the international experience, both in our continent and maybe outside of it? Can we actually prove that that theory holds?
Thank you, Andile. So I'll discuss the rand and why the rand hasn't weakened in the way we expect it to. If you look at other countries where countries such as Brazil or Turkey, where there has been a downgrade, the currency has weakened. But currently what has happened in South Africa is that we had a downgrade at a time where globally there's a lot of uncertainty, especially in the developed world. So for instance, if you look at the US, politics there haven't been supportive of the US dollar. And so we've had bouts of weaknesses in the US dollar. If you look at Europe, there was uncertainty around elections in Europe, which then led to outflows out of investment out of Europe and into South Africa. And that's what has supported the currency. Another reason why the currency has fared better is because of the search for yield. Investors are looking for high returns in risky assets. And a country like South Africa is a risky asset which offers a higher return. So what does this mean for tourism? I think that for tourism it is an opportunity because the currency is supportive of visitors coming into South Africa. And so we should actually see increases in tourism, or in tourists rather, because of the attractive currency versus, let's say, other emerging markets. I think where we do risk losing out on tourism is the impact of a downgrade on society. And what we are seeing is this increase of protests, and that could deter investors and visitors into South Africa, tourists who watch the news and watch these protests and realize that, look, some of them are actually fatal, lead to fatalities, some of them are dangerous, and maybe let me go to somewhere else where I might find peace, which is what you're looking for when you're traveling. So I think that is what we need to be to be worried about and we caution against. But I think that a currency that is weak is attractive for tourists and should actually support the tourism industry.
Let's talk about purchasing power parity, which is an interesting concept and not just necessarily talking about how one currency deals with another.
Yep.
So I've often heard of something called the Big Mac Index,
Yep.
where people are, where the theory is about, instead of looking at just the currency, for example, how the rand is according to the dollar, you should look and say, how much does it cost me to buy a Big Mac from McDonald's in downtown Joburg, and how much would it cost me in downtown New York? And that is the actual exchange rate one should be looking at. When these forces lead to a currency like ours weakening, does it therefore then follow that the purchasing power parity favors a market that is attractive to visitors into South Africa?
Definitely. So when I travel, it's not so much about the dollars that I have, it's about what the dollars will buy. So if I'm spending more on a meal in, let's say, Brazil than I am in South Africa, it makes Brazil an attractive country, an unattractive country because I'm paying more for my buck. So what is important for South Africa is that we still keep, our food is still, or the price of our food is still low, so it's attractive from that perspective. I think the price of traveling from one province to the other is still low, comparatively speaking. That should be attractive for visitors. And so that's what's more important than the value of the rand. It's how far your rand can take you in South Africa. So if someone comes from a CFA franc country, Senegal for instance, and comes to South Africa as a visitor, they will find South Africa a lot more cheaper than Dakar. And that's what's more important, I think, than looking at to what extent has the rand weakened versus the franc, or versus the euro or the lira or the dollar.
Mr. Mokoki, the role of big business, the role of small business, it is often seen as two very opposing ends, or maybe even sides of the same coin, where in an unequal society, the big boys, the big players in the industry, whether you're talking about accommodation or you're talking about tours or you're talking about any part of the tourism industry, South Africa is made up of the big boys and a very big space between them and the very small boys. What is the voice of business and what is the input of business in this conversation where we're talking about this opportunity that has kind of presented itself fortuitously? And also the fact that we're trying to deliver an inclusive economy.
Well, thank you, Andile, and thank your listeners. I think that we have to rebase and go back to the beginning. I mean, we are a society, and in a society, everyone has got an opportunity to start their business. Many of the big businesses, for instance, they started small. In other words, there are very, very few cases, unless you come through the merger and acquisition space, where you went out specifically as a financial deal maker and you were cobbling up businesses that you wanted to pull together for a financial investment. But many, many, many businesses started actually small. And I think it's important that we then fix the idea of the environment that then allows those small businesses to succeed and to thrive. And that's in the area of policy. And I always talk about the 4 Ps: people, purpose, politics, and policy. That you have to have a match between all those things and have a very clear idea about what exactly it is that you mean in all those particular areas. The challenge that we face as South Africans is a very significant, and it's a very, very big challenge. In particular, when you look at purpose, you are dealing with this triple challenge that every other person is talking about, which is poverty, unemployment, and this idea of inequality. And in your question, you find the answers in these things. In other words, can you really have a thriving small business environment if you do not deal with the issue of inequality? And the answer is always going to be no. And can you have small businesses succeeding in an environment where the policies are not necessarily conducive for those businesses to succeed? And I think that the answer is going to be no. So from competition policy in respect of how you deal with relations between regulation, legislation, and policy, you need to have a level of consistency in respect of what it is that you want to achieve around that particular purpose. So if you do indeed want to fix the problem of unemployment, of poverty and inequality, the idea of enabling people or enabling small businesses to thrive is very critical, because most of the jobs are actually going to be created there, whether it's in the area of tourism or in any other area.
But Alan, is it in the interest of big business to see small business rise? Because very often, if you talk to any entrepreneur in any industry, the feedback you're going to get is that, you know, the big guys are closing us out. They're not letting us in. And South Africa, as part of their broad-based Black economic empowerment strategy, has got this thing called enterprise development. You know, and it seems like that thing has almost got a glass ceiling. You know, at some point, I'm happy to help you, but once you start competing in my turf as a big boy, I don't like that very much. So we may talk about it, you and I, and it may make good sense to you and I. We could high-five each other. Mm-hmm. But when we get out of this particular building and we ask the big boys, are they really seeing enterprise development as something that's in their interest? I'd have to say that's not my experience.
Well, I think that we have to agree to disagree on that point, because let's go back again. If you are starting a big business, you are going to be in an environment where you need to create a product or a service that must be sold to someone. The someone is what you refer to as a customer. And if you are going to have customers, it has to be in your self-interest as a big business that there has to be job creation. Now, if bigger businesses, because of technological advances and resources that they have and capabilities in any other area, overall cost leadership, they can segment their markets very well, they can forecast, they've got big money, and they've got higher price earnings multiples that they can raise capital much more cheaper, and they don't necessarily have to rely on the banks. It's quite clear that those big businesses will fail if employment is not actually being generated. A big McDonald's business, because you referred to Big Mac the other day, if there's no employment being created, they are not going to be able to sell enough burgers. No one is going to be selling anything. So it's in the interest of big business, and perhaps maybe the question that needs to be addressed is the extent to which the leadership in big business understands the imperative of why an inclusive economy ought to be. Because when we talk about an inclusive economy, it's not because we're trying to be nice to government. No, it's because we understand for South Africa to be a globally competitive environment, we need to have a size of the market which is big. I cannot help Standard Bank, who just happened to be one of my members, to be a size of a bank which is 5 times bigger today, unless there is employment in South Africa, unless many more people are starting their own small businesses. Because remember, the very same small businesses happen to be clients of banks. They are also, by the way, clients of the bigger businesses. So there is a very strong symbiotic relationship between small business and big business. And of course, if you are an investor, you go into business and you think that a smaller guy is giving you trouble, you do want to crush him, and that's quite normal. It's normal behavior. But that doesn't necessarily mean overall you'd like to kill small businesses, because that is the lifeblood of any economy.
Okay, all right, that's the word from business, both big and small. Let me move on to Matsatsi Ramoela. She's the Chief Executive of TBC SA, that's the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. That actually is an organization that's trying to do a relatively difficult job, Matsatsi, which is trying to put all the stakeholders of tourism under one umbrella and to speak with one voice. And that talks to whether that is government, whether that is private sector, big and small business, the operators themselves, the mom and pop shops, everybody in one umbrella trying to speak with one voice.
Now, one of the things the president earlier on was talking about the whole issue about radical economic transformation. And so I have a serious problem sometimes where when we think about, small business coming in and previously disadvantaged communities coming in, it's always about, can I have a stake in the existing businesses?
Right.
Can the big business, offload some of their assets and give it to us? Why should it be about taking somebody's cake? Yeah? South Africa has a lot of opportunities. We have a lot of people in this country, we have a lot of opportunities in communities, and we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. And so we need to learn innovation. So one of the things when a small business comes in and wants to talk to me about your members, Machachi, because I get accused that I represent the big boys. I'm saying exactly what Ali was saying. Big businesses were small business at some point, and they gradually grew up. And how do you get into business? How do you grow? By being innovative. You got to bring something that the market needs. Yeah. You got to bring something that the market needs, something that people. But if you're going to replicate what the other people are using, you're not going to get anywhere. Yesterday we had a discussion around technology, the role of technology. Yeah. And how are we as Africans embracing technology to begin to solve the problems in our own local communities? Why is it about, I'm going to the city center of Durban, I'm going to create something that somebody else is doing at the moment and hoping to compete with that person? Where is the innovation in ourselves? And tourism is about that. And if you're going to be running a tourism business based on saying, I've seen so-and-so doing ABC, you're not going to win. Tourism is about what is it that Andile today, as I look at it and I think, what does Andile want today? I think Andile needs a holiday. But I need to go and find out what kind of a holiday will interest Andile. And therein lies the opportunity for tourism. And so for me, I would like the conversation to move off. This thing about big and small. It is an issue, but we should not make it bigger than what it is. We have a responsibility to educate our people in the African continent to appreciate that we have. How many people who live in this part of the province, because they are saying they are poor, how many of them appreciate that 2 hours from Durban, there's the highest mountain, in one of the highest mountains in Africa, it's here, the Drakensberg. We have other people coming from other parts of the world coming to admire that which is ours. Do we take time to go and discover? Do we take time to discover that enough to package it so we can interest other people?
So let me pause you there though and say, so how easy is it then for an operator, a tourist operator who is from KwaMashu, not far from where we are now, who wants to start a business to take tourists to Drakensberg? Is it relatively easy to access the opportunities that are there? And is it a farce that the big operators make it difficult for that person?
Let me put it this way, Andile. How easy is it for someone to become a musician? Did they go and ask some of these big players and say, oh, I want to be a musician. Well, how do I do it? Or did they just start it? I have a talent, and I want the world to see it. That's how easy it is. You have to bring something the market wants. Yes, there is an issue around the market access. But again, if you're going to come out with a product, make sure that you have a unique market which is yours. But if you're going to fish where I'm already fishing, of course I'm going to defend my turf. And that's what it's all about. We have the whole Africa, Andile. We have the African market. The African middle class is one of the fastest growing in the world. How many of the local tour operators, emerging tour operators, are looking at Africa as an opportunity to bring them to South Africa? How many of us, there is an opportunity. Is anybody going there? All of us are packing our bags. We are going to Europe, we're going to the States, we're going to China and all those places. What about Africa? It's undiscovered. And therein lies. So there's a story called what's in front of your nose is where the opportunity lies. But therefore, the next thing is, Andile, hence I go back to the issue of, are we educating our people about this sector? We need educating our people about tourism because people don't understand this sector.
Right.
Secondly, we need our government to be the leader. How do you lead society? Education, but you must be in the forefront of inspiring confidence, of creating that environment that says you can start a business, making the legislative processes much easier, making travel in Africa easier. I mean, we make it so difficult for our own people in Africa to travel. So, I mean, look at aviation. One of the biggest challenges we have in this continent is that if I want to go to Algiers today, I have to go to France before I go to Algiers. We need to sort out those little things. That's where government comes in.
Okay.
When the president talks about the high-speed train situation that's going to be put, that they're busy discussing in the AU to make mobility in Africa easier. That's what we're talking about.
Okay.
Making it easier for people to travel, and therefore you're opening the opportunity for me as an entrepreneur to package a tour because I can get the people there.
Now, I've just also been joined by the Chief Executive of South African Tourism, Mr. Sisan Chona, who's had to spend a little bit more than anticipated time with the State President. I must say, CEO, I listened to the President's address this morning, a couple of good announcements from your organization specifically, so you might want to touch on that. But also some of the comments that he was making about what government is doing to try and unlock this opportunity of, well, maybe other industries are struggling, but tourism is a great opportunity. You want to reflect on that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andile, and apologies for running late. I mean, look, we're absolutely thrilled. You know, when you've got the number one citizen actually elevating the status of tourism, you've got to take notice basically around it. And it's all about alignment. We have to make sure that we start to diversify our economy. You're actually de-risking it. Right? Because if your sole reliance is going to be on commodities, you're just going to be sliding basically down. You know, so Indaba is really a platform where, as a country, as a continent, we're actually putting our foot forward and saying we want to make sure that we grow this industry. But key to the growth, how do we bring in new players in, basically? And I think that's the part that we want to take along, players coming in. You know, and then I've just been listening to the comments from Tourism Business Council is, yes, we want to bring in new entrants, but there's also what we call invisible barriers that are there. How do we start to lift them up, right? Because someone who's been established for the last 50 years, I don't care how great you are, you're not going to penetrate, you know, without a deliberate intervention from that perspective. But I think the smart money is, where are the new source markets? Where are we going to get these new visitors coming in? And whom do we choose to place in front of that market so they can develop it? You get what I'm saying? Putting more people in the same place just doesn't work from that regard. Secondly as well, look, we've been leading as a country on three main items. We call them BBB. It's a beach, it's the berg, bush. You understand? But South Africa
Beach, berg, bush.
BBB, yes. Right.
I've just added this to my own bucket list, by the way.
Right. However, South Africa is much more than just these three things. So again, how do we bring in new players with different offerings? Is it agri-tourism? Is it rural tourism, basically? Is it township tourism? You know, whatever it is, it's complementing what's existing so that the traveler who would have stayed 3 days now stays for 7 days because there's more to do. Lastly as well is that the president also highlighted about domestic tourism. We actually want to promote people becoming visitors in their own country. It's got a lot to do about patriotism, it's about love of self, basically, and curiosity as well. So how do we get more South Africans to move, understand their country, so they can become tourism ambassadors, ultimately? You can't become an ambassador if you don't know what it is that you're showcasing.
How do we even begin to convince people to come to our shores if crime is such an issue? Lorika Nxumalo specifically saying, how do you say, please do visit South Africa again, to a person who was robbed of everything, including their passport? Now, this is something that's very top of mind for South Africans, and it may be a very different experience for those who visit. Let me start with Tabi. Tabi, you've just traveled recently.
Yes. So when I was asked to do this, I travel a lot, and I travel a lot as a black female alone. And this is important because I've been to countries like Nicaragua, which is #1, the most dangerous country in the world. I've been to Guatemala alone, I've been to Brazil, I've been to Colombia. You name them, I've been there alone and nothing's happened to me. The difference with South Africa and these countries is that we export, we market ourselves through crime. So we export this image that we are a crime-ridden country. I actually went to Nicaragua, not knowing how dangerous Nicaragua is, until the taxi driver said to me, we can't go through this suburb because it's a drug-ridden suburb and we have to go around. Same thing with Argentina, which is not associated with crime, but there's a place in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, where no one goes to, the locals. As a South African, there's not a single place that I can't go to, or anyone that, there's not a single place that is so dangerous that I can't walk in and I can't drive through. And yet there are countries out there that are flooded with tourists, and they're not associated with their crime. I think that we should change the way we see ourselves and change the way we speak about ourselves. Yes, we have a crime problem and something that obviously government needs to solve, and ourselves, because crime is also comes from the home. But we shouldn't advertise crime in the way we do. We have a lot more to offer as a country, as a people, and not, crime is not synonymous or shouldn't be synonymous with South Africa.
That brings us to the end of our special broadcast from Indaba 2017. Thank you so much to my esteemed panelists. Thank you to everybody that's in the audience.